Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by actually taking a moment to inform the members of this body and people who may be listening. If you weren't aware, it appears that a tragedy has struck at the Boston Marathon, and bombs have gone off, and there are injuries that we know of, casualties, the severity of which we do not yet know. We hope and pray that there are no fatalities. Apparently, according to the news reports I've seen, it's too soon to know that with certainty. So I know my good friend from West Virginia joins me in having our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims and their families of very, very disturbing news that we've just learned this afternoon. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the Senator from West Virginia. The work that we've done together has been challenging and constructive, and I think we've come to a very sensible legislative product, something that I can be proud of. I want to thank Senator Kirk for the work that he did in this from way back, and Senator Schumer's contribution to this process as well. I'd like to start, if I could, with just some thoughts about the Second Amendment and what it means to me and why I think a proper understanding of this is so important in this discussion. Sometimes it's useful to go to the source, and so just as a reminder, not that we're not familiar with it, I'm just going to read from my pocket version of the Constitution, the Second Amendment to the Constitution, which simply says, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Now, today we often think that the Second Amendment is about sportsmen, it's about hunting. That's an important part of it, but the Second Amendment is actually much more profound than a protection for hunters. It's more fundamental to our country and who we are as a people. In my view, the framers recognized in writing the Second Amendment, they were recognizing our natural rights, our natural law rights of self-defense and self-preservation. And in fact, those rights precede the Constitution. They were acknowledging and recognizing those rights in the Constitution. They didn't create them. I would also suggest that the Second Amendment is about sovereignty. Who's sovereign in this country? Is it the government? Is it the head of state? Or is it the people? And I think, as we know, this whole great experiment of ours that is America is an exercise in recognizing the sovereignty of the individual people. And a sovereign people, of course, it flows logically, ought to have the right to bear arms, to protect themselves. And ultimately, our founders intended the Second Amendment to be the means by which we would maintain our liberty and prevent tyranny. We often take for granted in a democratic society in which we get to select our own government and our constitutionally protected rights are respected. But we all know that around the world and in the recent past, there have been appalling cases where tyranny has destroyed the rights of relatively free peoples who in many ways have come from societies not terribly dissimilar to ours. So these are some of the thoughts that occur to me when I think about the Second Amendment, why it's so important to me. I see it as a very important part of our very identity as a nation and as a people. That's why it's very important to me personally. In addition to being a gun owner and someone who's always respected these rights, it has a very important philosophical underpinning for me. For years, of course, we had many contentious debates, and one of the contentious debates we had about the Second Amendment for many, many years probably arose from the first phrase about the well-regulated militia. And the debate centered around whether or not this right, this Second Amendment right that obviously is enshrined in the Constitution, whether that was a collective right that depended on one's membership in a militia or if it were an individual right belonging to individual people. Now, it was always clear to me this is an individual right. clear to me for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the founders never recognized the idea of collective rights. For them, it was all about individual rights. But fortunately, our judicial system put an end to that question when a conservative majority of U.S. Supreme Court justices reached the Heller decision in D.C., Washington, the District of Columbia versus Heller. They made it very clear, this is not a collective right. This is not contingent upon membership in a militia. The Second Amendment is an individual right that applies to individual Americans, and I wholeheartedly agree. Not too long after that, in the McDonnell et al. Versus City of Chicago decision, the court went even further, in a way, in upholding the Heller decision and referencing that. It affirmed that decision, but it went further and said that this Second Amendment right is so important and it's so fundamental and it's so basic and it's so important that it's binding on states and local governments as well. So not only can the federal government not infringe upon Second Amendment rights, but neither can a state or local government. So that's a pretty impressive conclusion that our court has come to in resolving a big part of this contentious debate. Now, I would pose a question that the court has also addressed, and that is this a right that's enjoyed by all of the people of America? In my opinion, and I think this is not controversial, the answer to that question is no. Young children are not expected to be afforded the same Second Amendment rights as adults. Criminals who've been convicted of crimes have foregone many of their rights, including Second Amendment rights, by virtue of their conviction of serious crimes. And dangerously mentally ill people are people that we as a society have every right to protect ourselves from, and so they don't have the same Second Amendment rights that everyone else has. Now, I would argue to our founders this was a given. After all, this was a time when capital punishment was quite common, and they fully accepted capital punishment. How perverse and absurd would the idea be that someone who was subject to capital punishment would somehow be able to enjoy his Second Amendment rights? Of course not. It's obvious. Criminals forego that right. The Heller decision is a recent Supreme Court. The recent Supreme Court decision I just referred to addresses this as well. Justice Scalia observed, and I quote, "Nothing in our opinion," that's the Heller opinion affirming the individual right of the Second Amendment, he says, "Nothing in our opinion should be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms." It seems to me that is a very explicit explanation that it is not an infringement on Second Amendment rights to attempt to keep firearms out of the hands of criminals, mentally ill people. So if the founders are in agreement on this, and the Supreme Court is in agreement, and we have laws in all 50 states that make it illegal for certain criminals and mentally ill people to have firearms, the question is, are we willing to take modest measures to try to achieve this goal that I think we all share and that is clearly consistent with our Constitution? That's what Senator Manchin and Senator Kirk and I are trying to do here today. What we're trying to do is make it a little bit more difficult for the people who aren't supposed to have firearms in the first place to obtain them. And I think Senator Manchin will agree with me that there's no panacea here. There's no law that anyone could write, certainly not this one, that's ever going to guarantee that a determined criminal won't be able to obtain a weapon one way or another, or that maybe even a mentally ill person may not be able to obtain a weapon eventually if they're sufficiently determined. But can't we take a very modest step to make it more difficult? If we can do it in a way that does not infringe on the Second Amendment rights of the law-abiding citizens that whose rights we want to defend. So our bill, I think of it as doing three broad things, and Senator Manchin and I will get to, we'll walk through some of the specifics of how we achieve this, but I would suggest one way to think about it is three categories. One is we simply encourage greater compliance with the background check system we have in place now. We're not inventing a new one. We're not inventing new criteria for it. But the fact is, the participation in the background check system by the various states, you see, we rely on the states to provide information about the people who have been adjudicated as mentally dangerous, people who have been adjudicated as criminals and they've been convicted. Federal government doesn't have that information. We rely on the states to provide it, and what we do in this bill is we create greater incentives for the states to in fact participate in this, because the participation varies dramatically. A second thing we do is we expand background checks to gun sales at gun shows and over the internet. Again, this isn't a new system. We're just applying this background check to a category that has not been subject to it, but it's the existing system. And then the third thing, and we'll talk about this at a little length, I hope, is we have a number of measures in this bill that, frankly, I think are overdue, and they enhance the opportunity for law-abiding citizens to simply exercise the Second Amendment rights that they ought to be able to recognize. So I think Senator Manchin put this very, very well. If you are a law-abiding citizen who enjoys exercising the Second Amendment right, you're going to like this bill. It's going to enhance your ability to exercise those rights that you have. If you're a criminal and you'd like to get a weapon illegally, you probably aren't going to like this bill because it's going to make it a little harder for you to do that. And it'll also make it harder for someone who's mentally ill. I'm going to yield back to my friend, the senator from West Virginia. But before I do that, I want to make just one simple point about how tangible and how real and how important this can be. To this I'm referring to enhancing compliance with the NICS background check system. We all remember the Virginia Tech shooting. And the tragedy here, one of the aspects of this tragedy is that the shooter's ability to obtain a weapon might have been prevented. I say that because the young man, Sung-Hoi Chu, had already been adjudicated to be mentally ill, dangerously so, by a Virginia judge. They had discovered this. They had figured this out. They knew that this was a very unstable and very dangerous man. But the state of Virginia never passed that information on. And so there was no information about this man in the national background check system. When who knows whatever demons possessed him to go out and obtain guns so that he could wreak the havoc that he did, he went and submitted himself to a background check. And he passed with flying colors because the system didn't have the data. What Senator Manchin, one of the things that Senator Manchin and I are proposing in this legislation is let's provide greater incentives, and there's a carrot and there's a stick and a cost to states so that they will be more in compliance. Now, I'll be clear. If Virginia had provided this information to the system, then this shooter from Virginia Tech would have been denied that day, and we don't know what would have happened after that. It's possible that he would have found some other way to obtain weapons, but think of all the other things that might have happened if he had been denied at that moment and he had walked out of that store. Who knows what else might have intervened? Whether he would have gotten help, whether he would have been stopped some other way. We'll never know that. But it seems to me that it's a good idea to try to put that block in place. And that's one of the things that we would achieve. Our legislation, I think, would go a long way over time to encouraging and, in fact, realizing a greater compliance on the part of the various states. And Senator Manchin may want to elaborate a little bit on how we achieve that, and then I would continue in this discussion with him.
Mr. President.
Yeah.
Mr. President, I come from